So my name's Jane Morris. I'm the group lead for the Bath and Bristol group, and I'm joined this evening by three guests, each coming from different locations across the UK. I'll let each of them introduce themselves to you and tell them a bit about the reason that they've come this evening. Of course, our topic is all about menopause, and each of our guests have got a very keen passion and a niche area as part of their own coaching businesses relating to menopause. So without further ado, I'll go to Stephanie first to introduce herself to you. Thank you, Stephanie.
Hello, nice to meet everybody. My name is Stephanie Daniels, and I am the founder of Life Begins at Menopause. My journey started just very briefly in 2015. My mum passed away from ovarian cancer, and after she passed away, I got tested for the BRCA gene, which is the one that makes you more susceptible to get breast or ovarian cancer. And when the results came back positive, I had a double mastectomy and an oophorectomy. And the oophorectomy floored me with a surgical menopause. It just smashes you into surgical menopause. And when I came up for air, I was working in media for 22 years, and it just felt very tone deaf to ask people for money because at the same time, COVID was happening. And I took the very difficult decision, especially as I worked at Talk Sport, and my husband is a massive Liverpool fan, so he just couldn't get his head around it. But I took the decision to change career, and I started my studying at the College of Naturopathic Medicine. So I did a 3-year diploma in nutrition. And that really enabled me to join the dots between what we eat and how we feel. But what became apparent very quickly was that by speaking to people and asking them to reduce their caffeine, reduce their alcohol, increase their protein, and make changes to their food and lifestyle and diet choices, there's a real emotional tie that people have with some of these things. And when I was thinking about this, very fortuitously, barefoot fell on my lap and just appeared. And I thought, this is absolutely the right thing to do. So I layered that on my skill set. And that enabled me to create that safe space for my clients to think about why these foods and these habits had a hold on them. And then lastly, I work with a machine called a bioresonance machine, which scans the body for energetic imbalances and enables me to get to the root cause of what is going on with my clients. And for me, that is my guiding light, getting to the root cause of things. So I'll leave it there for now, but I can speak more if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And Tracy.
Hi, very nice to see so many faces and also not just women on the call, which is great. Um, I'm calling in from London, and my journey has been in health and wellness for over 25 years. So I'm a dietitian and a coach. And with the two separate hats on, I've seen very different things. I work with women day in and day out, but coming through the door of taming all those troublesome symptoms, and then they start having a conversation about how I used to be a go-getter and thrived on the pressure. Now feels like a chunk of my brain has been taken out, and I'm just doubting myself and struggling. Everything just feels hard. And then with my coaching hat in the leadership space, women coming in, doubting themselves, just not having the same confidence as they used to, and kind of feeling a little bit, and I went through this as well. You're sitting on a Zoom call and you can't remember the words. You're just like, but then as we start talking, there's just this whole host of things around how they're eating, when they're eating, what they're eating, how your body starts to change. And so the conversation ended up going in a slightly different tangent. So everything that I've studied as a base nutrition was then leading teams to then thinking, well, you're getting me to come and work with your teams, but everybody is hungry because nobody's eating properly. So kind of like nutrition seems to be following me around, even though I sort of keep on stepping back from it. And I think my golden thread is health and wellness. And there is just so much, this sort of became a little bit of I worked in the space and then became a little bit more of a passion project, which has grown now to be more of a business aspect because perimenopause and the pandemic for me collided. So even working in this space, I was like, surely not. Could it be? And I kind of, because those symptoms are so similar for what we experienced when we were going through the pandemic. And so I met Jane on my journeys and also studied barefoot sort of 2014, but my very first coaching course was in 2000 before it was even sort of popular. And I think over the years, I've just laid and laid and laid. And now I feel like I have a real, it's harder to put me into a box, but actually all of that different facets come together. And I think particularly in women of a certain age, there is so much we have to offer. And the way hormones come and the way it's probably positioned a lot more in a Western society stirs up a lot of fear because there's just so little, one, we're not taught, there's not very much support, or otherwise it's all the horror stories that we hear. And actually, if we change that reframing, they don't even have a word for hot flushes in Japan. In Native American cultures, they call it the power era. And yeah, we're like, oh my goodness, my hair's falling, I gotta put on weight and you can put me on the shelf. So a lot of it is around perception. And I think that's where the beauty of the coaching comes in, that everybody in this space, either out of curiosity or working with women, has a real in creating that container, that safety, that space to almost pause, revisit, and re-emerge again. And I think that's where things like the coaching are super powerful, because we aren't just what we eat, we aren't just what we sleep, we aren't just how we move, how we interact with others, but actually it comes back to the essence of us. And I think that's the thing that sort of like the sprinkles and also the roots of the coaching that comes in. So really excited to be able to share and just sort of hear questions and contribute into the space, but also just with coaches, connect more with coaches and kind of think broader than what necessarily our training enabled, but actually where it ripples out into so many different areas. And so, yeah, I'm pleased to be here today.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And Lauren, so glad to have you joining us as well. Are you okay to spend a few minutes just to introduce yourself in a similar way to Stephanie and Tracy have?
Sure, absolutely. So I have about 30, well, more than that now, nearly 40 years worth of human performance experience under my belt. I've got one of those real portfolio careers, and I think the opposite to Tracy in some respects. It's becoming easier to put me into a box than it's ever been before. So I started out at university at 16 doing double maths and computing, and came out with a degree in psychology. And that was my first kind of major pivot from going from very male dominated, very kind of, allegedly one side of the brain, different theories in this one, and then jumping over to the other side altogether. But I'm massively curious about what makes people tick. I always have been, and I've seen that follow me through my career. I've qualified in anatomy and physiology, personal training, sports therapy, nutrition, coaching, mentoring, mental health, menopause, menstruation, and lots of different topics over the years. But I had a kind of portfolio career and ultimately ended up working as a senior exec in financial services, leading global transformation projects and programs. And I went through about 18 months of not knowing which side was up. I got some very dark places. I'm a sole parent of a child with lifelong medical needs. And I got some very dark places. We'll leave it at that. But I left my job thinking I had early onset dementia. And it was 3 doctor's appointments later when he turned around and said to me, Lauren, you've just been through menopause. I was the happiest menopausal woman in Bristol. And I suddenly realized that there was between all the things I've been doing through my life. I had the corporate experience, the coaching experience, I had all the anatomy and physiology, and I had the nutrition and the personal training and the mental health and all this stuff. But I didn't know what menopause was. I didn't know the endocrinology. I'd never had a day's problem with my periods. I had a 17-day period, so I went on to contraception. That meant I had a regular monthly cycle. So I'd never really experienced this stuff to do with being female and being or hormonal. And it was a real wake-up call to me to realize that so many people in our population are struggling with menstrual health issues, fertility issues through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. And so I obviously dove deep into the endocrinology and started bringing people together in menopause socials to talk about their experience. And that very soon became me presenting and giving talks to different organizations. I've now partnered with over 400 FTSE and Fortune 350 companies. I've taken 200,000 people through my free Menopause Basics program and trained over 500 menopause coaches and champions. So I resonate completely with everything that's been said so far, because it's more than it's more than just being coached through this. It's about really having a solid understanding of menopause. It's about understanding how our bodies work, what changes are coming our way. I had an executive coach as a senior leader. I had an exec coach when I was going through my experience. And she was very good at putting a sticky plaster. No, she wasn't putting a sticky plaster over anything, but her questions were leading me to put a sticky plaster over what my experience was. And we weren't addressing that root cause, as you were saying, Stephanie. And I think that's the trick with coaching people going through this menopausal journey. And that's everything from peri to postmenopause. It's about what are the right questions? How can we evoke that sense of psychological and physical safety in our clients and help them reach deep into understanding what the things are that they need to do to actually navigate this time of life successfully? Because we can, and it is just a lack of knowledge, it's just a lack of resources and knowing how to ask for and receive that help and support that leaves people struggling and suffering. So I'm really excited to be here today, and really grateful to you, Jane, for putting it together, because it's a topic obviously I'm really passionate about. I spent 10 years, pouring everything I can into it, and I just want to do everything in my power to raise.
And that's what this panel is all about. It's about raising awareness, but it's also about deepening your understanding generally as coaches, because there are lots of efforts collectively now being made to raise awareness. We're right in the middle of Menopause Awareness Month, which is fantastic that in itself that it even exists. And yet, what does it mean? We've heard it thrown around as a term. Some of us will relate to it directly in our own lives. Others will tentatively be tiptoeing around it, not really knowing what does it mean, and what does it mean if it arises in the coaching space and we're not equipped with an understanding. How then do we support a client in navigating an exploration around what it means in relation to them in their lives? What are these questions that would be useful for us to ask? And what do we need to bring in terms of cultivating space where our clients feel safe and feel that they can express and explore and feel well held by us, whilst maintaining professional boundaries and not treading in territory where we're not skilled and equipped to go. So in terms of safety and psychological safety, we're now at nearly 20 past. So usually around this stage of any of these sessions, I close the doors so that we all know that who's in the room is who's now here, and I won't be letting other people join the call now that we've started. As I said at the very beginning, and some of those of you that have joined midway through, you may have seen something you had to click to say, yes, I'm aware this is being recorded, but I just want to explicitly verbalise that we're recording it for the benefit of others that couldn't be here or were too late to join in. So please, if you're asking questions or you're sharing reflections, and it will very much be an interactive session, we'll be encouraging you to get involved, but also please do manage your own self-disclosure and only bring things you feel comfortable sharing in this format. So in the chat function of today, I want to invite you to share any questions you might have to the panel as a whole, or if there's an individual that from what they've shared so far, you're particularly interested in something that they've mentioned about their experience, about their junction, where menopause came into their life and they met it and it became something that they then led to learn more about, then feel free to address that to the individual that you specifically would like to hear an answer from. And I will do my best to keep an eye on the chat and to weave in your questions and to try and share so that each speaker gets to share a sort of an equal amount and with as many of your own voices in the room as possible too. So I'm curious already from where we've began. Stephanie, when you're meeting menopause and it's coming up in conversation, is that largely because of something you've explicitly shared about yourself and how you set yourself up as a coach, or does it just naturally seem to organically arise? And how do you meet that when it does?
So, Jane, can you just help me understand that question a little bit more? So it's how do can you repeat that for me in another way, please? So
yes, of course. So you've all got different strands to the way in which you work, and you shared about different aspects of your work that you offer to clients. is it always under the umbrella of menopause? Are people specifically coming to you because of menopause, or do they seek out your services and then it just so happens that menopause arises in the conversation? So, for example, for me, I specialize in burnout, and quite often menopause will be a co-occurring condition. It will be something that has maybe led to the person even burning out because it's exacerbated things, and it's meant that whatever has been a stressor in somebody's life has been highlighted and exacerbated, and therefore I'll start having conversations around it, but it will be because the person's come through burnout. So I'm wondering, in your instance, is it very much front and foremost in a conversation, or does it come more organically through another means?
I would say that the company says it all, right? So we've got Life Begins at Menopause. It does what it says on the tin. So they know what I'm about before they even come to see me. And when they come to see me and I meet them where they are, inevitably they've either heard me speaking or they've been referred to me or word of mouth. And we start with them talking about something that they're experiencing, a symptom, and that will have the narrative of, I'm just not myself. I have lost all my confidence. I've got a cotton wool brain. I don't know where to go anymore. My confidence is flawed. So it kind of starts with that narrative. And it's up to me to help them navigate that. And this is where the lines are very blurred with me, because I'm a nutritional therapist and a coach. And so when I coach them, I have to really step back and be less directive and empower them with tuning into what's going on in their body. And we have to work at that together. And I kind of give them the power to do that. I meet them where they are. And that's really, really important for me, because I can't force them onto anything, as we know as coaches. I can't manipulate in any way. I can't direct. And sometimes I will keep them very aware by just being totally transparent with, listen, do you want me to explain to you? Do you want me to signpost? Do you want me to put my mentor hat on as a nutritional therapist? How do you want this? What's going to best benefit you? So giving them that space. But ultimately, it's joining the dots between what they feel and what they're eating, and what they're consuming, and what's going on in their mind, and how they're showing up to me. But they will come to me knowingly, because I've got Life Begins at Menopause. They've heard me speak. They've been recommended.
Thank you. I'm going to ask similarly question to Tracy and also to Lauren, but I'm also wondering, when somebody then searches out your services and they're clearly already self-identifying with menopause, how equipped are individuals, as a general finding that you've had from the work you've done so far, in regulating and managing and feeling like they've got sufficient resources and support outside of the coaching? Because one of the things that seems to come up time and time again around this topic is the lack of research, the lack of understanding, the lack of support that women are being able to access, and therefore they're pretty lost in the middle of all of this. So I'm personally kind of curious about that, I guess. I'm wondering whether it is as it seems on the outside looking in, because I don't have people coming specifically for that topic, or whether you found differently to that.
So I've got two very distinct hats that I wear. I actually still do a nutrition clinic, NHS, as a dietitian in a women's health clinic, and I support the IBS long COVID clinic as well. So some of them are coming specifically for symptoms, but they've actually waited quite long. The very typical one, menopause is one day in time when you've not had it for 12 months. And as Lauren said, many women are on contraceptives, so that's kind of like a little bit sort of irrelevant, but actually all of the symptoms, or the troublesome ones, are often before. So I see a lot of women coming, and I say near the end, as in by the time hot flushes are coming, and that's quite far down the line. By that stage, their sleep is disrupted. They're already, if they didn't have PMS before, probably getting it a lot more anxious than probably what they ever were. Just that sort of juggling ability is not there. So I think there is a perception around age, which is something that comes into as well. There is total lack of awareness. I mean, 50% of women haven't actually even connected that sort of changes in mood and anxiety are linked with changes. And so if you don't make that association, it's hard to seek out help before. And I think going to your, so that's a very obvious because they're coming through the women's health clinic or something's wrong. And sometimes they've already seen the menopause specialist. So that's an obvious, and that's more a specialist type role that I've got. But from the coaching arm, this is actually working with execs. So they haven't necessarily, some of them come through that door because it's through a talk or some connection that we've got, but many of them are coming because they're just struggling at work. Like you said, burnout is coming. And then sometimes we say, oh, I think I'm doing this. So then I might take that hat off. And there isn't a lot of support. There's a lot of fear around what it means. There's a lot of fear around hormones, even though that's not necessarily in the coaching space. But I think there's just a lot of unknowns. And Lauren, I'm guessing, probably sees this quite a lot in the workplace where nobody really thinks much about taking folate when you're wanting to have a baby. It's just something that we do. You don't think every day, I don't want my baby to have spina bifida, I don't want to have spina bifida, but it's become so normal now. And I think if we can get to the stage where there's a lot more awareness of your body is going to go through changes. Sometimes, like Stephanie, it's a little bit of a crashing into menopause, and some of us, it's a little bit more, it happens normal physiology. There are still changes, but if we understand, oh, there are certain things that happen that are going to help support us on these journeys, and if we start strengthening some of those pillars and how we frame it as this is about age and wisdom and grace, it might be very different to being fat, hair falling out, and a hairy chin, which is kind of like a lot of the memes, even though they're memes, they still dropping in those little messages. And it's not just women that don't have the understanding. Medical profession, there was a survey, it was about 3 years ago, and of the 32 universities that were surveyed, only 30% of them had a mandatory menopause chapter. So we already know that there isn't the education that it needs to be with healthcare professionals. NHS system is overstretched, so you might get 10 minutes. A lot of women get put on antidepressants before hormones. So there's a whole lot of unpicking that needs to go. So from a proactive view, if all of us in this room can almost just start almost providing more of that education and just awareness, that's really going to send out a little bit more of a ripple effect. I think there's also a lot of denial. So women don't want to say, I see that in clinic, and we start talking about age. Oh, your age, da, 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 da. They're like, oh, I hope it's not. So we've already got this thing that it must be something bad if you're saying, oh, I hope it's not that. So I think there's also that aspect. Is it really, could it be? Oh, I hope it's not, which sometimes means they don't ask the question.
Yeah, that I can. I think there's so much work still to be done around the stigma of that surrounds it,
Yes.
that we avoid, and that occurs as well with burnout, and also with neurodivergence, and of course neurodivergence can be, the traits of a neurodivergence can be exacerbated when we enter into the menopause, and so some people have this sudden sort of flurry of experiences all coinciding at the same time as each other, and quite understandably almost want to resist any of them being real, because suddenly your whole world can be changed, almost overnight. So thank you, Tracy, and that's really, really valuable. Lauren, can I come to you?
Sure. I think, as a pure coach, we're never leading our clients in any way, shape, or form. We're asking open questions. We're helping them reach deep into themselves. And for me, that just didn't work when I was going through menopause. It just didn't work because I had amazing sessions. My coach was an executive coach. She was very well qualified. She was an organizational psychologist. She was master's and doctorate trained. She was an amazing coach. And this is where you might want to kick me out of the call, because at the risk of being a little bit controversial, I guess that having gone through what I went through, having had a coach, having qualified as a coach in multiple different ways, I definitely feel that if you're going to specifically support someone on menopause, you need to know a little bit more about what's going on with people. And I think it can be very dangerous, although it comes from a very good place. I think it can be very dangerous to just use your own experience. And I did a post actually on LinkedIn today where I was talking about, it's a very personal journey, and it is because everyone's journey through menopause is unique, and everyone's journey is so utterly different. And there's so much confusion in the media, especially right here, right now, at the time of recording. Now, I work with doctors from all sides of the fence and all parts of the world, and they're broadly in alignment with each other in their approach, those that are qualified and trained, but they're in the minority. We still have outliers. And because many doctors have become quite celebrity in their appeal to people, we're getting very polarized views. Do we use bioidentical or body identical hormones, one's regulated, one's not? Do we take hormone replacement therapy or do we not? There's very, very powerful views allegedly backing up both of them. And I think that it's really tricky if you don't understand the endocrinology at a very basic level in terms of what does estrogen do in the body? What is it responsible for? How does it impact how we think, how we feel, how we behave? What body systems is it affecting? If we don't understand that, it's very difficult to ask our questions, the right open questions to help them come up with their own plan, their own way of moving forward, to source the right help and support. As coaches, we're not telling them what to do. We're not advising them in any way, shape, or form. And as a menopause coach, we're definitely not either. But I've seen time and again people that have had amazing people to work with, but they just haven't been able to ask those right questions. And during the pandemic, when all my kind of in-person work got completely cancelled between 9th and 11th of March, I came home from doing a big top up in Cirencester. It was cancel, 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 postpone, 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 that wonderful part when everything was shutting down during the pandemic, and all my in-person work kind of ground to a halt. My corporate clients were saying, can I teach their people to deliver the type of coaching that I had been doing, so they had people more available to support as they were navigating the new waters? And that was when I started realizing, your coaching skills, and they are absolutely paramount. They are the number one most important thing. But actually having that core knowledge, because I was trained as a coach to believe that once you're qualified as a coach, you can coach in anything. And I do believe that at one level, but because of my own experience, I still feel that if you're going to get deep into an area, then having a basic knowledge and understanding of that area can really help you choose the right questions to ask clients to help them create better outcomes. So possibly controversial. I am curious.
I think I keep missing the end of your sentence.
Oh, sorry.
And I feel
I
like
said, I'm
I need
curious
to
what you
guess
think,
what
Jane.
you said. But maybe it's just my
Sorry.
question. I think you said you were curious to find out what would be in the room, and serendipitously Sam has her hand up, so let's find out. Mic to you, Sam.
Yeah, I was really intrigued what Lauren said. I'm I'm a ADHD coach and a menopause coach, and the reason I do that is because of my experiences with perimenopause and ADHD, and I'm also background in change management and other stuff. And the bit that always stuck with me from change management was the first step is awareness, and it's really hard to coach around what you don't know, you don't know. That old saying, the mind that holds a problem also holds a solution, but it also does need to have a base level of understanding about what's going on. And as an ADHD coach, I can't coach my clients without them having some sort of info sharing or some baseline information. And as part of the support we get for disabilities with DWP and access to work, there is an element of disability impact training and coaching as a separate thing. And I think it's really important that those two things work in parallel, particularly for people who are newly diagnosed for things a disability or condition. However, if you do not live in balance with your hormones, then the impact of that can have symptoms that could be classed as a disability. How do we go about kind of joining those two things up? Because I think coaching on its own, you're not getting the power of it if people haven't had that I have to be very explicit about, there's an info sharing element of the things that I have to do for the first 6 sessions, so that I can kind of bring us all onto a, you know, an understanding of landscape, so that we can coach around it. But it does make it difficult when that boundary is, you know, not well understood. So yeah, I just intrigued. I have tried to get some of my clients who have menopause related issues to test the waters with DWP around, can they get disability impact training and disability awareness training for menopause as they do for other conditions in the workplace. And then obviously the coaching has got a much better foundation to work from. So if they know about how their hormones work, the coach then doesn't necessarily need to quite so much, you know, to be perfectly honest. So they can bring that bit themselves. So yeah, so I was just intrigued to know how people, you know, how we, you know, are people seeing that is happening hand in hand, because otherwise we're just missing part of the puzzle for me.
I think it's all of these things are evolving as well, and there isn't a hard and fast, this is how to set things up, or this is how to do it. Like, starting to understand, whether it's menopause or other areas that we specialize in coaching around, where there is a need for information to be shared and things to be relayed before, as you say, we can coach around it, because otherwise, where's the starting point? How do you otherwise, if there's things that you know, that because you have done some sort of training, then you have something that might be able to support that individual. But I think that's a different starting point than a coach who doesn't, and is maybe here in the space and curious around, how do I make sure that I'm supporting the person in front of me as best I can, given that I maybe haven't got a training in menopause that I can lean on, that's giving me that information. And I guess that's part of what this evening's about, is that you start to take some key information, because everybody's got to begin somewhere, and then look at, okay, where am I really starting to become aware that I'm incompetent in this, or I don't know enough about this, and I might want to understand more. Or where do I, on the other side, go, actually, this isn't something that I feel strongly enough drawn to that I could read around, upskill around, and actually maybe this is where I know that I need to make a referral, because I wouldn't be able to ask the questions that are maybe that useful. And there's maybe a coach that would be better suited to the individual in front of me, who would know the questions to ask and where to take things. But as we've already started to tease out, by having these sorts of conversations and by generating more awareness in organizational settings, organizations then start thinking, okay, where do we roll out trainings that enable everybody to have that baseline information? And it needs to be happening not just in organizations, but in our education system, as was already spoken to. You know, we don't realize we're in the experience of perimenopause until it hits us, and start thinking, wait a minute, how come I'm feeling this way, or I can't do this thing anymore, and wondering what's wrong with us, and starting to read around it, and then start having conversations with friends or family members, and they start saying, oh, maybe it's perimenopause. And then what even is that? And then we start researching, because it's been a bit of a taboo until recent years. It's not been the topic that we've been introduced to at a young age. It's not been the topic that's typically been around, you know, discussions or in relationships in home settings necessarily. And I'm wondering that all three of you and out into the room as well, where you feel we've got ways to go with that. What do we do to start improving that situation from the experiences you've had so far? I go around in the same order again, Stephanie, and then to Tracy, and then to Lauren, but feel free others to do. Yeah.
Feel free to interrupt me. I think you hit the nail on the head, Jane, when you said we have to start somewhere. The landscape is so murky right now, and the tide with that is starting to turn with the narrative. We're starting to talk about it. We're starting to get more curious about it. Research is starting to be done on women, and believe it or not, there is. So I belong to a platform called We Connect that certifies women in businesses, and they said that one of the women who own their businesses owns a a Tampax business, and she said that they're just starting to research with real blood. So that gives you an idea of what's going on in the world and what's going on in the terms of researching. And it's very, very murky. People will come to us inevitably because they've hit a brick wall. They've tried with their GP and they're not getting anywhere. They're not being listened to. They've spoken to their friends. They're on social media and the noise is just so loud and so overwhelming. And they've hit a brick wall. And so they've navigated their way to us. And I think, like an onion, we have to start somewhere to get to the core. We have to give them that space to think, okay, these are your symptoms. Let's go and tune with them. What's happening? Because the body talks to us as I'm going to quote you here, Jane, if you don't listen when the body whispers, it will shout. And so if we get a headache and we don't listen to it, it's going to turn into a migraine. But that headache is there because of a nutrient deficiency or because we're stressed or we're stretching ourselves. So we need to tune into that. That's kind of one way, just to give the space. And you don't need to have studied nutrition for 3 years to do that. That's just about empowering the person in front of you to join the dots between what they're feeling, what they're doing, what they're consuming. And then empower them to either be signposted to a nutritional therapist, a dietitian, CBT. CBT is one of the things that doctors are now offering menopausal women because they're realizing that it's the space that they need. And it had mixed reception when it went out. People weren't sure about, CBT. It's a little bit like when we get given antidepressants when we say that we're hormonal or menopausal. So we're all navigating our way through this very messy landscape. Life is messy, menopause is messy, hormones are messy. And I feel like together, by signposting, by directing, by staying open and curious, we can make things happen and we can keep going in the right direction.
Thank you, Steph.
And just to build on that, whether you have, I have also a thing with labels, full stop, but it's a way to people start to kind of connect with you or your offering, but also just think about that person that's sitting in front of you, that woman. What are some of the themes that are emerging? Is it doubt? Is it confidence? Is it feeling overwhelmed? There are a lot of tools that we have in our toolkit. Even if you aren't a dietitian, even if you aren't a doctor, that already can add benefit. And there are multiple pillars that need to be strengthened. And one of them at the end might be, let's take your hat off and have you considered this? Maybe they do need to see the GP, maybe they need to see somebody else. But actually there are a lot of things, whether you are an HRT or not, that person sitting in front of you is still going to need space, still going to need to make sense of what's going on. And by that awareness again, actually noticing some of those cues. So I think sometimes we can put labels on things and this person mentions something, you're like, oh, you are experts at asking questions. That's what we do for a living, that curiosity. And so I think that is something that, yes, you might understand a little bit more, but if you've studied all of that, but that's not the be all and end all over time. If you know that you're tending to see women of certain age, and you're all going to get there yourself if you're not there already. So learn anyway. And men, you're going to have a partner or a colleague or somebody that you're working with. So it's kind of like a collective. We all just need to understand what's happening with our body, full stop. And we kind of, it stops at a certain age. So it's a much bigger problem. But instead of making everything scary, it's like, we can figure this out. Okay, what is going on? And I think if you use that as your starting point, you're already going to be winning.
Thank you, Tracy. Lauren.
Yeah, it's a really big question, isn't it? What needs to change? I think when I started working in this space, I mean, I'm 18 years postmenopausal now, and nobody was talking about menopause when I went through my own journey, my own experience. And having a premature menopause or a clinical menopause, whether it's medical or surgical, that is a very, very different experience than someone who just becomes menopause between 45 and 55. So 2 parts to answer your question. First of all, something we maybe haven't done, or maybe you've done this before, so stop me if you have. But just to clarify what menopause is. So the menopause transition itself is when we go from having our monthly cycles and potentially being able to get pregnant to not. So we've had whatever our menstrual cycle is. For some people, it'll be somewhere between 25 and 35 days long, might be shorter, might be longer, might be more irregular. But we have this menstrual life for about 30 to 40 years. And then our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone levels are starting to decline. And we go through a phase called perimenopause, which can go on for a few years because there's no one length that everyone goes through. And during that time, periods become more regular, irregular, heavier, lighter, closer together, further apart. And PMS-like symptoms can kick in. So your bloatedness, your tenderness, your itchiness, your dry skin, hairs appearing and disappearing from different parts of your anatomy. All sorts of anxiety and sleeplessness and hot flushes and night sweats can kick in. Once you've gone for 12 months without a bleed, we then say that you're menopausal, which is one day of your life or a moment in time, and thereafter you're postmenopausal for the rest of your life. So just that basic information has to be shared because people still don't know the word perimenopause. People still don't understand menopause transition is everything from peri to post. People still don't understand that it happens between 45 and 55. And if you become menopausal at 45, your periods have stopped at 44, and that's normal, which means that you've probably become perimenopausal somewhere in your late 30s, early 40s, but your bleeds, your menstrual cycle stopped at 44, you've become menopausal at 45. That's normal, as is the same at the other end of the spectrum at 55. And I think that people don't have the basic facts down. So we need to get that basic information out there. We need to understand that the core hormone is estrogen, and we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies that affects our brain health, our heart health, our bone health, our soft tissues, our digestive system. And this is why every single lifestyle choice that we make is going to impact how we experience that menopausal journey. And coming on to HRT or not to HRT, very personal decision for everybody, but everyone should be making that decision with their doctor. Going back 10 years ago, less than 10% of women in the UK were on HRT, and now we're just over 20%. So it's still the minority of people that are, but there's a lot of social pressure because of social media to put people into space where they're going, if I'm not taking this and on it forever, I'm going to be, having these problems. And then another school of thought thing, if I am on this, I'm going to be prone to all these risks. And it's a very, very, very individual choice about whatever route and whatever pathway you create for yourself as you go through menopause. So I think that's the core piece that we need to get out there. Fundamentally, the biggest thing I think needs to change is that our schools at primary level have to start teaching all genders how their bodies work. If you're assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, you need to understand what your hormones are doing. You need to understand why I have these surges during puberty. We need to understand what's going on in our body and normalize it so that we understand that the decisions we're making can have an impact on how we're thinking, feeling, and behaving. And if we knew how our bodies worked before we come into our regular, hopefully regular menstrual cycle, we would be able to get help and support more quickly for menstrual health issues, and then get the right help and support for perimenopause, and not have all these dreadful, nightmarish stories that we hear about and read about in the press. So for me, it's about education. That's the core thing that has to change. And I love what you said about, understanding enough to know when it's time to refer on, or enough to know how to build up your knowledge to be able to ask the right questions. But I think if as coaches we recognize that when people transition through menopause, all their body systems are impacted, and therefore all their lifestyle choices are going to have an impact on how they experience menopause, that's going to set you up really well to ask some really great questions. Plus, remember, as coaches, we are so good at giving help and support. And usually our clients are people that are really good at giving help and support, and often poor at receiving help and support. So again, asking questions of them about what help and support do you need? How are you going to access it? What might get in your way? How can you push through? All those kind of questions as well to help them think at home and at work and medically as well. So I think these are the type of things I would love to see change so that people can get help quicker and sooner. And as coaches, we can guide our clients to that place in a much more appropriately expedited fashion.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm noticing there's a question come up in the chat as well about how are each of you finding in relation to clients the balance between them looking for you to knowledge share as much as they're looking for coaching, which kind of links back to what we were speaking about earlier. I just wondered if there's anything further on that any of the three of you would like to share.
Yeah, again, I think just what Tracy says, it depends on how they find me, how they navigate their way to me. So if it's through a coaching conversation, and they've got that space, they just want to offload, and inevitably they will spend the first 20 minutes just offloading, brain dumping, and they can't come up for air. If it's through a nutritional avenue, then yeah, or they just want to leave me drive advice. Where do I go? What do I do? And they need that guidance. So there's two real disparities between the two, you know. And it's just about reading the person in front of me and engaging. What do they need right now? If they need advice, then I have to give that to them. I have to give them that guidance. And if they need space, they've had no one to listen to them and no space to do this. And they're just so grateful that they can come and they can brain dump and offload to us. And that's wonderful to see.
I'd probably add to that. Oh, sorry, Jane.
I was just going to ask that either of you if you had anything else to add. So
Sorry, I just missed out your sound. I think that it's really hard as a coach when you're coaching, right? You're not giving advice, you're not usually giving information, but I guess I've developed over the years that there is an element of I was going through an experience for several years before I found out what was going on with me. And there is often, people will be going for tests for their heart and going into A&E for ECGs because they think they're having heart attacks when they're having palpitations or anxiety attacks. People are going for brain scans because they're having these most horrendous headaches that are worrying the life out of them. People are going in for MRIs and ultrasounds on their joints because they think they've got this sudden onset arthritic condition. And these can be tests that people are having done, over the period of maybe 2, 3, 4 years. And every test is coming back and saying, negative, you're fine. So this poor individual that's struggling is becoming more anxious, their self-esteem and self-confidence is going through the floor. Every medical professional that they've looked up to and believed that whatever they've been told has been the right thing all of these years, because typically in the UK, we expect to go to our doctors, answer some questions, maybe have some tests, and then get some sort of treatment that's going to fix us. But all those professionals have said to us, no, you're fine. Everything's come back negative. Don't worry. And so the anxiety levels are building and building and building. And so they're trying to mask all of this and keep on going. And of course, they're then in a position with completely flummoxed about what to do. And no one's joining the dots and suggesting it might be menopause. And this is another reason why, as a coach, if you understand some of these things and you're aware of these types of things, again, it can help you with your questions of your client. So sometimes that background information can be really helpful in your intake forms, just more generally, if someone is of a certain age, or if, you've picked up any kind of particular interventions that might have indicated they've had an oophorectomy, a hysterectomy, treatment for endometriosis, the types of things that put them into menopause, like state or menopause, then that can help inform your questions with them as well and help them set their goals and set their objectives, whatever language you're using with them. So I think I'm going off on a tangent now. Sorry, I'm just so passionate about this topic. I just want everyone to feel like, you're really empowered to be able to get the basics down and open up a few more questions that are going to really help your clients get that pathway forward and really, help them realize they're normal. What they're going through is entirely normal. There's over nearly 1 billion people in the world. Well, depending what statistics you read, over 1 billion people in the world who are now menopausal. So they're not alone, but you can feel so incredibly isolated when you're going through this. The same with burnout, the same with all of these things that can come like a road crash at midlife.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can't help but thinking that the reason it feels like a road crash is because that space and the spaciousness, like Stephanie talked to, that we're privileged to hold, and the people who are able to experience coaching are privileged to be able to engage with, because so few people proportionately actually get to have that built into their life, and it's really a substitute for the spaces that we would have otherwise had pre the world going at 1,000,000 miles per hour and everybody working every hour that God gave them. We would have had the communities that held us, we would have had the support and the help, and the pace of life would have been more in tune with the seasons and with our own natural seasons too. And really, I think the hard part is when you're suggesting to somebody, what support do you have? Who can they turn to sometimes when the person that they turn to is equally, run ragged, burning out, hasn't got space, hasn't got capacity? Well, it's a sign and symptom of our current times, and how do we, I guess it's systemically start to address that, I wonder, which is a much bigger question, I know, but I'd love to start stimulating thinking around that, because I think that's why we're seeing this massive crash of all these things. It's because we don't have the space to allow ourselves to acknowledge the subtle changes that are happening in our bodies, and attune with those and respond to those until the body is, as Stephanie said earlier, shouting. Anna, I see your hand raised. Thank you.
I'm a reflexologist and a new coach. I think my struggle with this area is I treat a lot of women in reflexology for the symptoms that they're experiencing through menopause. And then from a coaching point of view, having those conversations, often the symptoms that they're presenting to me, they haven't even realized that they're potentially perimenopausal symptoms. But the area I struggle with is often, it's not within my competence or experience to be able to, I can't diagnose them. I can't, I can have a conversation with them about it. I can raise their awareness. But my frustration, I think, is it's who to refer them to, because so many times they do come and they have been to their GP and they have been offered, antidepressants, or they haven't, or they've been told they're too young, or they've been told, they've been turned away, and they haven't had the support that they've needed from the very people that they need to get it from. And potentially some people have the opportunity, if they've got the finances, to be able to go privately and to go to different clinics, but so many people don't. And I feel in my clinic anyway, there's just banging their heads against a brick wall, and they go online, and it's so much conflicting information and so much noise in which direction to go to. So as a reflexologist and a coach, it's very difficult you can only support emotionally, but knowing how to help them navigate the path is such a challenge. I don't know whether anyone, from their experiences in their world, have found that a way to kind of support these women more effectively.
So Anna, I get that quite a lot, because I'm also coming from a nutrition background, having worked in a hospital setting as well. So I've done CBT insomnia, I've done like the whole, so you kind of can connect all the dots. I've put some links which I'll drop in at the end. It's actually practical things where you can signpost, like what do you do if your GP doesn't believe you? I've got a connection for a symptom checker. So I kind of actually talk them through, okay, well, write your symptoms down, look at this, here are the NICE guidelines, here are the BMS. So some of them are all kind of like links, which might not necessarily, we might troubleshoot, or sometimes at the end I might say, would you like me to take my coaching hat off at the moment? And just, so some of that, these are all in public domain. They're not secret Holy Grail stuff. It's just more about getting it out there. So I've actually made a whole lot of links, which I'll drop into the chat at the end. So practical things, and also just comes up even in my nutrition clinic. I'm like, just write a list when you go into the GP. You've got 10 minutes. Today you're going to remember all the things that are wrong. Tomorrow you're going to feel awesome. Or if you're perimenopause, you probably forgot what's on your list. So write your list down. Do your old lady list. Put it on a post-it notes, take it with you. And I think that's some of the things that we can probably help with in coaching, is also that agency, that sense of, how do I speak up? How do I set boundaries? How do I make myself clear? Those things, those are all key parts of coaching, whether it's perimenopause, whether it's a heart attack, whether it's lack of boundaries and working too long. There's similar concepts. We're just changing what we're dropping in. But because you and I have maybe a healthcare background, we can see all these things. We kind of know what's coming downstream. So you're like, oh, please. But you've got to keep that in the coaching setting. And sometimes navigating those two spaces is a bit of a challenge. Sometimes you've got to remember which one you're in. And also, I think if it's at first, harm, if you see something obvious, and actually there's nothing wrong for saying, have you spoken to your GP? Or if they say yes, okay, well, here's 3 resources that might help you. Or shall we troubleshoot how we do that conversation? So there are lots of things that you can actually bring into the coaching space, even if you don't know the ins and outs of that particular area.
I think that's really useful, Tracy. Thank you for sharing the links in the chat when you do as well. I think often when we have some sort of niggle in ourselves that feels like, oh, I wonder if they've got this piece of information. Is there something here that I could be adding? Using that prompt within you to nudge yourself to then ask a question and find out, what do they already know, and is there a gap there, or are you just perceiving that there is? And then, as you say, offering into the space with a coaching approach what might be useful, and it might be about mapping out the thing that person needs to explore, and how might they find the resources they need. How do they enjoy accessing that type of information? Who do they already know that they could seek that sort of input from? And then maybe you are changing your hat and recontracting around something that you might know that would be useful to them, in the same way that you would recommend a book to somebody, or bring something else in. Like, and I sort of nodded before to neurodiversity and burnout, for example. There might be something that you would know that you feel that person in front of you is maybe missing, and you offer it without attachment, because you're not there to diagnose, and it might not be the right thing for them, but by holding it back, you would be somehow equally maybe more harm would be coming from them not knowing, and you may be knowing something that could support them. There's a couple of comments in the chat. I'd love to read Jamie's first, and then I'll come to Sam's as well. So James says, 1/2 of the population will experience menopause in their life. The other half may share some experiences that may impact their life and need to understand more. Getting women to talk about this is hard enough. What can we do to raise awareness in men too? And I'm also wondering, he says, about considering the support for those going through menopause being available from all angles, including partners. If you could speak to that, and also maybe weave in here from the knowledge that those of you that are on the panel have around andropause too, because equally that's something that doesn't get talked about. I have lots of clients who are men who start questioning their own abilities and functioning and other things, and don't realize that there's also a midlife experience that typically they also transition through, that isn't yet being spoken about as widely as menopause is. And I think could also perhaps speak a bit to that, if any of you would like to.
Yeah, I hear this all the time. It's just amazing how often I hear it. And the men come up and they say, menopause, where, and we'll probably talk about this, but effectively what andropause is our testosterone declining, and that has massive implications for men. So they're dealing with their own hot flush, their own anxiety and their own mood swing, but they're also living with people and working with women who are going through these changes. So the fact that you're asking, you are one of many that are asking, and I love that you did, Jamie. There is support everywhere. Not only with the GP, not only with organizations and conversations like this. So it's World Menopause Day on Friday, and there are so many conversations going on, and so many workplaces, corporates reaching out to come and educate their staff. So these conversations are happening everywhere. There are groups all around that are specifically for this. And I think once you start looking, you will find something that resonates with you. There are local clinics and local groups, if that's what you want to go to, and find out information, find out what's around you. And then we have specialist coaches. So there's specialist coaches within here, and we will always be able to help direct you or signpost you as well. So I think the fact that we're talking, we're having this conversation, Jane, you're saying that you're on the board now and you're going to be looking at local events, just asking the question and conversation starting is absolutely imperative. And effectively, I think that from my experience of working with women that I have done, they know a kind of direction that they want to go down. They know that if it's HRT that they want to go down, and there's clinics set up for that, or they know if they have a really bad relationship with either themselves or the people that they work with, and that's more of an emotional mindset point of view, or that they just can't get a handle on their alcohol habits or their caffeine habits, in which case you would seek nutrition advice. So I think by giving them that space and staying curious about what support they need, that will enable us to direct them better.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think what
Yeah.
with permission, I can pop a couple of links. I've got a load of blogs, and within the blogs, there's a couple of articles about how to speak to your partner about menopause, how to support your partner with menopause. And again, with permission, Jane, I've got a free course that I run every 2 months, and I run it live. I run it live deliberately because information is changing all the time. Jane, actually, I've got to dive off. I'm really sorry.
Good, Lauren. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's all good. Okay. Thank you. So just pick up there. I'm not sure if the links have already come from Lauren. If they haven't, I can't see them there, but I will obtain that and I'll share it in the LinkedIn group following this evening. For those of you that might have been interested in that. I've also noticed, and thank you for sharing in the chat, Tracy's shared something, and Sam as well. I'm just wondering, Sam, I might just download this and screen share it very quickly. If there was anything you might like to speak to it with. I'm trying to find you. You've moved around on my screen since Lauren left. Would you
I just, when I came across it, people talk about brain fog, and I saw that picture. I think it illustrates, it's not just brain fog. It's so many areas of the brain are being rewired. Science calls it a dynamic neurological transition state. It's significant. It's not, we don't call it by its name. It's minimized. So I think, all those parts of your brain are regulated by estrogen, and as perimenopause, and also other hormonal periods in your life, the bit before your period is due, pregnancy, teenage years, anything with significant hormone shifts can be impacted. So for people who like pictures, I say, okay, so it affects all those bits. I think people can easily work out, that's quite that's quite significant, isn't it? Sleep, mood, energy, motivation, arousal, learning, memory. It's pretty much everything that your body is trying to do. So I use it just as a kind of easy way to relate to the significance of the level of change that we're experiencing, and our unreasonable perhaps expectation to be able to maintain all the things that we are currently doing while this is going on. And like we say, Western society doesn't allow for the space to make this transition safely, which is perhaps why we get all the negative aspects of it that we do. And if we knew that this was coming, if we were able to plan for that, I suspect people would perhaps give themselves or plan for not having to do quite so much, or at least expect that they didn't have to do quite so much, or have that support. And like you say, when everybody's maxed out and nobody's got any bandwidth, particularly the people in life who aren't going through this. So right now, my partner, we have a really good relationship where, there are times of the month where I find things harder than others, for sure. And he knows that. So we're really explicit about it. There's a pattern to it. And we discuss picking up the slack on that time where possible. And then the times he can't do it, and that's fair enough. But, we plan for that. It's like, assume I'm at 20% this week. Let's not book more stuff in. Let's take stuff out. And whilst that's easy to do when you've got some control over your diary, it's not so easy to do in the workplace when you don't. So I think that's the challenge for me. I'm now back in the workplace, is how do you create a hormone-friendly pattern of work where this can be taken into account? You can't always get it right, but you can be cognizant of it at least. So yeah, that was it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a really key question as well, and many of us will be supporting senior level leaders who are looking to move up in organizations. They don't want to leave their careers simply because they're no longer able to spin all the plates that are being expected of them. And what do you do when you come up against an environment that hasn't got any leeway for allowing space for the changes, and perhaps leaders to feel as though we're not of significant enough value for those accommodations to be made, and yet that's a huge problem. We now have so few women in C-suite positions because inevitably everything, as what was the term that we used earlier, sort of kind of clashes or collides at the same time. And I don't have the stats to hand, but it's a shocking amount of women that leave simply because they feel they don't have any other option, and it's such a waste of knowledge and talent. And
1 in 10.
9 in 10. No,
It's 1 in 10.
1 in 10.
1 in 10 they
And 25% don't go for promotions or stop where they are, to not have to juggle even more. Yeah. So it's a lot. And if you look at where they are in their career, that's a lot of, they've been doing something they love. They're quite high in their trajectory, but also from a business perspective, like the amount of corporate memory, and the amount of mentoring and role modeling that is getting lost, is quite, yeah, there's a lot of work that we can do downstream to change that as well.
and 80% compromised. So, there's 80% who aren't at full potential working. So it's not like, that they are making do, muddling through and, having challenges that they perhaps needn't have. So yes, the 1 in 10's, but actually 80% of us have some level of impact that perhaps we can not have, which would be great, wouldn't it?
And I think it comes back to that 50% of women that haven't sort of connected the dots with things like mood, anxiety, fatigue, which are happening a lot sooner before they even get a hot flush. And that's sort of like one of almost your last symptoms, or what Jamie sort of mentioned about relationships. Just as your testosterone tanks as well, your interest in sex is just not there. Your body's changing. You're not feeling attractive. You're irritable. One minute you want to cry, the next minute you're flying off a handle, and now they want to have sex because they're also going through their changes. And then it's more like so it's just that whole communication thing. And Kelly Kaspersman does some great work on You Are Not Broken. She's actually a urologist. She works with men and women. And it's a lot around sex, intimacy, the bedroom, hormones on both sides. So that's a great resource, because this is something, there's an increase in relationship breakdown in this stage as well, which is also coming from communication breakdown, just from lack of awareness of how both of our bodies are changing. Yeah. So a lot that can be avoided or worked through, and sometimes people have just grown apart, but actually there might be some things that can be averted just by re-looking at all our different relationships with ourselves, with our bodies, with our partners, with food, with movement, with colleagues, what we're doing. So it really comes back to that invitation back to yourself again.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome back, Lauren. We were just touching on the challenges of what happens when women who otherwise have got so much to offer to organisations end up leaving because they feel as though they don't have another option, because maybe there just isn't any understanding in the setting, and continuing to deliver in the way that would be expected of somebody 10 years younger, or just isn't sustainable. And Sam was sharing some stats around that, and then we were also talking about the ones that don't leave and what that means, and then that led into a bit of discussion about relationships and the impact on relationships when both, whether it's two women, two men and a woman, in any combination, there's going to be fluctuating hormones with both parties, and how do we continue to stay in intimacy and connection with each other when we're feeling like we're not coping, and our libidos are doing something different to what our partners maybe is, and we're also contending with, we're still in the workplace trying to keep the plates spinning, and perhaps feeling just by the time the day's done, we've got nothing left for ourselves, let alone to give to anyone else. So you're welcome to chime in with anything you'd like to say before we close out.
Yeah, no, I just thank you very much for touching on that. Obviously, that was the beginning of my reason for jumping into this whole space, was because, I genuinely thought I had early onset dementia. I didn't think I was going to be able to cope and continue to carry on. I think one of the things to say is that a lot of the statistics that you see banded around, like 1 million people leaving work as a result of menopause and other statistics, just question everything and anything that you see online, because there's a lot of misleading information. And I don't know if you touched on that one particularly, but they come from Bupa and CIPD that did some modelling that showed that around about 333,000 people a year are leaving work as a result of not having any support through menopause. So, if you're going into organizations, if you're offering your services in organizations, be mindful of the statistics you use when you're building the business case to go in and do work with them, and just fact check everything that you look at as well. So that would be my kind of tuppence worth. So sorry for having to dive out. We had something else going on at home today that anyway, thank you. I appreciate your patience with.
All good. All
Lauren,
good.
can I just say on the back of that, yeah, we've totally got you, so don't worry about whatever's going on. You're bringing so much value to this, and it's lovely to hear another coach's perspective. I feel like we're all nurturers and we're all caregivers, and I think that there's this myth that we need to bust. I certainly have an old ingrained people-pleasing habit where I need to protect my boundaries and communicate clearly and with clarity, because I have my own boundaries to protect, and I don't want to get to a stage where I'm pouring from an empty cup. So it's fine that we're trying to navigate our way through this and trying to support the coaches that we're looking after. But we also need to look after ourselves so that we can replenish rather than deplete our resources. And I think that there's 3 anchors that I have that I'm going to share with you. And one of them is my sleep, which is a non-negotiable for me. And for me, it works that I turn my device off at the end of the night. And it works for me. I get that space, and that I can always feel relaxing when I just turn it all off. I'm not that virtuous. My husband sleeps with it right on next to me, which is really annoying. So my sleep is a non-negotiable. And also with that, in the morning, I love my coffee. I love my coffee, and no amount of training at college will teach me to give up my coffee, but my coffee doesn't love me. And so my boundary is that I can have my one beloved coffee, but I can have it before midday. And then after that, I have to just have some teas, nurturing herbal teas, because otherwise I'll have those palpitations. My brain will go everywhere, and I will be just, running on empty. My second is nutrients, so nutrition, so what I'm feeding myself, not only what I'm consuming in terms of social media, but the food that I'm putting in myself. And so I just invite you all to look at the back of the packets rather than the front. The front are made by the marketing department. And they say, oh, it contains this and that, and wonderful. And they pull out all the bits, and they're kind of scrimping and scraping. Contains vitamin C. And when you turn to the back and you see the list of ingredients that's longer than your arm, if you don't recognize the foods that you're putting into your body, neither will your body. So they won't be able to utilize those nutrients, or any good work that you're doing will just get lost. So just make sure that you recognize the food. And then the third thing is detoxing, and we detox in so many different ways. We detox through stools. I know there's adolescent humor around stools, but it's kind of where I go to. So I need to ensure that my clients and I am passing stools every single day, because we detox hormones, we detox toxins that are coming in, and we detox the food that we don't need. Also sweat regulating. So if we're sweating too much, there's going to be an electrolyte imbalance, and that's going to have an impact. And then we've got things like skin. So if you're not detoxifying properly, your body and the toxins are going to recirculate, and they'll want to come out somehow. And skin's the biggest organ in our body. So we can get things like hormonal spots, and it goes on and on. So I just invite you, look gorgeous, Sam. I just invite you to just think about yourselves as well, and how you are filling up your own stores, and what is nourishing you and what's depleting you. Because like you say, we're all, we have our own boundaries to protect as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anything in closing, Tracy, that you'd like to share?
I think the message, if we could all take away, is really start tuning into yourself, start learning about changes that happen in the female body, and trust yourselves Even if these things seem strange, everything is figure outable. And there was a lot of sort of practical questions that got asked. So I've just actually dropped in the chat for yourself or for your clients what to expect when you're not expecting perimenopause. So a little bit of the science, a symptom checker, which you can give to any of your clients or use for yourself, some nutrition tips as well, some power foods, fit in very smoothly into your day. And there was a lot of questions around, not necessarily the coaching questions, but just understanding a little bit more about menopause. So actually on my Instagram page, that's mostly an education type of page. So feel free to pop along there. And it'd be really nice to connect with people via LinkedIn as well. And I've also put if you did want to ask me any questions, there's an email in there as well. So I'm always keyboard away.
And Lauren, you're still with us. I just want to quickly read Jamie's comment. He says, works in a large corporation, speaks more about menopause in the women's employee resource group than the women do. Shouldn't be that way, but it is a US company, and that corporate culture has an impact also by their own admission. Yeah, really interesting. And an invitation there to speak as part of that to the speakers from this evening. So just making sure you've noticed that. Lauren, what would your kind of closing takeaways be?
My closing takeaway is always hydrate and talk. I mean, it has to be to hydrate and talk. Just coming back to Jamie's comment, I work globally, and obviously we need to recognize the differences culturally that people experience in menopause. I'm actually just back from New York and New Jersey, and I'm off to LA later next month as well to do 5 days of talks. So if I can even just drop some top tips, I'd be more than happy to do that. But make sure that we create safe spaces for people to talk, and we encourage them to hydrate as much as possible. These are two things that I believe have a really significant impact. And that's why coaching is such a wonderful way to be able to support people as they approach and go through their menopause transition.
It would be wonderful. I'm just thinking in the sense of how do we start to shift things in the same way that organisations now have mental health first aiders more often than not. It's something that's caught on and companies are investing in, which I think is a fabulous thing. I think the build on that with mental health first aid is that those first aiders are also equipped with coaching skills, because I think that's what's missing, because as someone who's trained as a mental health first aider doesn't necessarily know how to create that safe, open, listening, non-judgmental space. And then how valuable is it really to somebody that goes to that person? But it's made me wonder, there is a missing link somewhere in all of this with menopause, with people that are available and that people can go to and speak to and chat through and get that information, get the guidance, and have a coaching approach at play where there's two hats being worn and brought together. I think there's space for that, and that it's needed. I'm curious in closing, that any other light bulbs that are occurring to people that maybe could be part of what we send out, those ripples. Earlier on, Tracy said about like the importance of what we do and the ripples that has, and sometimes thinking of a couple steps down the line, what is it that we could be advocates for in the conversations we have on LinkedIn and the spaces where we share, that might just prompt some organisations to think in the way that Jamie's just shared, to have more conversations, to bring in more support. I'm wondering.
I don't know about organisations. I literally have
sorry, Sam, go on.
I literally have the conversation with my kids about saving up for your year and a half to survive menopause this week, because organisations aren't going to do that for you. I think them having the awareness that it's important, or you can do what mummy's doing and crash into it I think it starts at the children, and we've all got a responsibility there, even if we can't influence organisations.
But maybe also, Sam, if we even go back, if we get better education, people might not have to take 18 months out of their work career unless they actually felt like I want to travel the world for 6 months.
Exactly. So it's a menopause stroke travel.
But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think you hit the nail on the head, it's education. But I think if we all just do a little bit, and also like Lauren was saying, a lot of people think menopause is one day in time. We have a life before and we're going to have a life after. It's I think it's like most things, the pendulum is going to swing. There's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of noise at the moment. a lot of buzz, a lot of noise. The pendulum is going to be a little bit crazy, but everything's going to be every single menopause conversation, to the point a little bit like, let's get women on the C-suite, let's have Black empowerment. So all really important issues. Businesses don't always know quite how to tackle it. So it's a little bit like, what's the flavor at the moment? And at the flavor at the moment, mental health and menopause have come together. And it's going to swing again. And if we can kind of like, if it means for this short, brief time, we get a bit more airtime, that we can start seeding a little bit more. And then we might get this normality. And if we all just do our own little bit with your children, with your partners, for yourself, even you start there, that is going to send a ripple. And maybe this doesn't sell newspapers, it doesn't win all the awards, but if we can start reframing around, not everything is doom and gloom. You know, we're actually put on this earth to thrive, not just to survive and make do. And I think that's where a lot of the coaching comes in, but just general life. And so I think it's that perspective and that energy that we bring, and maybe some of the words that we use, what are we putting out there? That's also going to influence the airwaves. That's also going to send ripples out. And so it's like a collective responsibility, because if we don't do our little bit, nobody's going to do, nothing will happen. We'll all be relying on somebody else. And maybe when we are stronger and we aren't going through all those things, we can support those that are. So kind of like a hand up and a hand down at the same time.
Yeah, and I think going back to the LinkedIn thing, I know that, I've been posting on LinkedIn for a long time now. And the thing that gets business is, if you want to get into organizations and you want to attract people's attention in businesses, there's two key ways to do that: share success stories and share facts. So create your business case, get that out there, post that on LinkedIn, and get the nuggets underneath the right people's noses. Make sure you're commenting on the people's posts that you want to attract attention to your posts, and just get super strategic about how you do that as well. I'm on a mission to train 20,000 menopause coaches before I retire or die, whichever comes first. And I just want to get as many people across the world out there to do this work, because it's so needed. And there can't be enough of us in the burnout space, in the stress management space, in the nutrition space, and all of these spaces. And I just think that, we need you. LinkedIn's a great way to get key core information, and personal stories, success stories, testimonials, facts and figures are just such a brilliant way to get organizations attention. And even if people don't like and comment on posts on menopause, they're reading it, because more than 70% of my business in delivering into corporate is from people that have just been following me and read my post, and they've never liked and never commented. So it's a numbers game. Just keep going and don't get stuck in the vanity metrics of how many likes and comments you've got. Just keep being consistent.
And I think also one thing that's maybe not covered, if I can just share this, there's two groups that are very vulnerable: those that don't have access because they just don't know, so they're going to have major problems further on. And then those that actually have got money because things are going wrong and you want to feel better. So if you just take some menopause, we are prime targets for the marketers. And when you're feeling awful and all these things are going wrong, and you've got money, it's more likely to get spent. So it's also around kind of credible people, learning, discerning, and some of that critical thinking, which is also hard when you don't even know where to start. But kind of like we've got two groups to be concerned about, and so actually messages need to come across the board as well.
Thank you, Tracy. And one little weave in before we end. Miriam was saying, as a Pilates teacher and coach, to mention physical activity and exercise, which has been a lifesaver for her. Would you like to say a little bit more to that, Miriam, before we end?
So I always recommend physical activity in whatever form people can do. It be really anything, as long as it's really done for the well-being, the holistic well-being of the person, so without any kind of competitive or performance aims, but really to find that balance. And as you said at the very beginning, the body gives the nudge sometimes. often. And in my case, definitely, I had that experience, so much so that I decided to train as a Pilates instructor after having practiced for over 20 years. And it does help. Yeah, so I would encourage anyone to try.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's a lovely note to end on, because as coaches, we're, whatever approach we're taking and whatever our niche may or may not be, we're helping people to find their way to themselves, to their own answers, to trusting their body, trusting their intuition, which is essentially where those answers that we believe are in there, they arise from. So by helping people to connect with their bodies and trust their bodies, the menopause isn't against them. It's a phase that is part of life, and how can they get that space so that they're able to best support themselves when maybe the rest of the world is still trying to catch up with that being the norm rather than the exception. Thank you all for being here. It's been really great having this conversation for everyone who's engaged in it, whether that's been through having your cameras on or listening in or contributing in the chat or coming off mute. It's been much appreciated.